วัสดีค่ะขอต้อนรับเข้าสู่ Lady AM Zone นะคะวันนี้โซนที่2แล้วนะคะโซน2ก็ใครที่ยังไม่ได้ชมโซนแรกนะคะโซนที่1ก็ลองคลิกดูได้นะคะโซนแรกก็เป็นโซนสั้นๆนะคะแนะนำตัวเจ๊เองก็คือใช้ชื่อศิลปินว่า Lady AM นะคะแล้วก็ cover เพลง Lost Star ไว้ค่ะสำหรับวันนี้นะคะเรามาอยู่ที่ Home Studioใน Silver Lake นะคะลอสแองเจลิสเป็นโฮมสตูดิโอของโปรดิวเซอร์และก็เอนจิเนียร์ท่านหนึ่งนะคะที่ได้ทำงานมามากมายเลยนะคะกับศิลปินที่มีชื่อทางในอเมริกานี้นะคะวันนี้เราก็จะมาพูดคุยกับเขาในเรื่องไม่ว่าจะเป็นการทำงานนะคะหรือว่าปัญหาที่ได้เจอมาระหว่างการทำงานแล้วก็ยังไงเดี๋ยวเรามาพบกับเขาเลยนะคะ Rob Hoffman ค่ะ
5 4 3 2
How did you get into mixing?
Mixing or engineering?
Is it different?
Mixing is just one part of engineering, right? So there's tracking, there's recording, and then there's mixing. And some people specialize in one or the other. Like the famous mixers are like Chris Lord-Alge, Dave Pensato, Mick Gazowski. Those guys are famous for their mixing. They can also record and track things, but they're really famous just for mixing. So that's kind of their specialty. And then there's a lot of other engineers who, you know, kind of do both and see a project from beginning to end. So I think mostly now I would say I mix. I would say 70% of my work is mixing. And then the rest is also tracking, recording from the beginning. I mean, basically I started as an assistant in New York City. I started like making coffee and getting lunch for people, and then
Sounds familiar.
Yes. And then worked my way up to an assistant engineer, so just being in a session and counting patch cables and documenting everything and still getting everybody lunch. And then eventually worked my way up to being a freelance engineer, which still includes getting people lunch.
Was that your first choice of career?
I didn't really know like what it meant to be in the music business. My family, like most families, was really nervous about me being a musician. They just figured I was going to like play in a bar band and hope that I would get discovered. And I didn't really know what it was either. I didn't know what the careers were. I didn't know what people did. I played guitar, I played piano, I played trombone, but I didn't know like how to turn that into a career other than like playing in a band. When I was in college, I started taking the electronic music classes, the studio classes, along with composition, and then also taking business classes, still never sure how this was going to turn into a career. And one summer, I took an internship at an ad agency in New York City, hoping that they would use my music. And sure enough, about 6 weeks into the internship, of course working for free, you know, doing basic Macintosh stuff, they asked me if I could write a jingle for a theater company for like their radio campaign that they were doing. They asked me if I could do it and if I could do it that night, and I said yes. So at that time I had like, you know, one keyboard and a DAT machine or something, and a sequencer, an opcode sequencer on a Mac. And I literally left the ad agency, maxed out my student credit card with like another keyboard and a reel-to-reel tape recorder and like a couple other things. Spent the whole night. I wrote like 3 jingles, and the next morning they listened. They liked one of them and they cut me a check. And I was like, oh, okay.
Did it cover your...
Yeah, pretty close to paying off like what I had, you know, purchased the night before.
Oh, cool.
You know, and I kind of went home and showed my parents, like, look what I made in one night. And they were like, oh. So that kind of opened the door for me, and it kind of opened their eyes for like, oh, wait a second, there is something other than playing in a bar band. Like where I'm from in New Jersey is like Bruce Springsteen territory. My parents went to school with Bruce Springsteen. Bon Jovi grew up, you know, 45 minutes away from me. Skid Row is from that area. Like it's a music area. So we're used to having like family and friends in the music business, but you know, you see like the huge, like the Bruce Springsteens, but the rest of the people like don't get to that level. So they didn't understand like what the music business is like in New York, Nashville, and Los Angeles. So that's how it kind of, that's how it began. after I got my degree in business from a place called Skidmore College, and decided that I needed more like engineering background to get a job in the studios, because at the time it was all SSL and Neve and Synclavier. There was no Pro Tools.
All cool stuff.
Yeah, it was all like tape machines and things like that. And coming out of like a liberal arts college, you know, with a business degree, like I didn't know any of that stuff. So I went to Full Sail Recording in Orlando, Florida, because they had the gear. That's a 1-year program, like 5 days a week. It's pretty intense, like 2 years of school shoved into 1 year. So I finished there. My first job right out of school was the Hit Factory in New York City. And actually, funny story about Full Sail is when I was just about to graduate, the head of like career counseling or whatever calls me and says, you know, we're having a meeting with every student. What do you want to do? What's your plan moving forward? And I was like, well, I really want to work with Jam and Lewis, you know, with Janet Jackson, and I want to work with Bruce Swedien and Quincy Jones. Those are my all-time, that's where I want to be. And he looks at me, he's like, man, everybody wants to do that. What's your real plan? Like, what are you going to do? How are you, like, what are you going to do? You really think, like, you think that's going to happen? And I was like, whoa, that's not supportive at all. Like, dude, come on, really? He was like totally unsupportive and was like, that's not realistic. So 2 weeks after getting out of school, I got a job at the Hit Factory in New York. Within 3 months, I was assisting Bruce Swedien. Within 6 months, I was on sessions with Jam and Lewis and Janet Jackson, of course, Michael Jackson. And then a year later, I was on a session with Quincy Jones.
Wow, so all of them, you know,
It all happened. Yeah, it was like, I'd like to see him again today, actually. Even though I had the degree, you start there as a runner, basically, getting lunch, literally counting patch cables every morning, cleaning up the studios, and then quickly they started putting me into sessions because I could set up the Synclavier, which was like the $500,000 version of Pro Tools at that point. I was really good on the SSL and the Neve. I was very fast typer and stuff. So the other assistants were really helpful to me. A guy named Brian Viberts, Andy Smith, Andy Grassi, Carl Glanville, Neil Perry. All these guys have gone on to like engineer for U2 and Oasis, and like they're all great engineers. Andy Smith is like Paul Simon's guy. Like he's been his engineer for 20 years now or something like
for
that.
live or for studio recording?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, so all these guys, they were all like my mentors. They were like one notch ahead of me. And thankfully, a lot of them liked me and they saw that I worked really hard. Like the hours were, I don't remember exactly, but it was something like 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And I would stay like 8 a.m. to midnight. You know, I was always there early. I always stayed late to help people set up and tear down sessions. And the other assistants saw that, and the boss saw that, and they started putting me onto sessions as like the second assistant. The first like big session, two early sessions that were really big, was the Wolf soundtrack with Ennio Morricone, who's like a huge. His music is amazing. So I was like the tape op guy. I ran the 3/4 inch deck that the orchestra was watching while they were scoring. The next one was Aretha Franklin with Arif Mardin producing.
Wow.
So that was like just massive, like right out of the gate. And then I did a jazz session that Marcus Miller produced with like Steve Gadd, Joe Sample, Bashiri Johnson, Michael Brecker, with Al Jarreau and Kathleen Battle singing. So like first 3 sessions, like just bam. I mean, you're setting up microphones, you're setting up cables, you're sitting in the back of the room, keeping your mouth shut, and just watching everything unfold. So that was it. That was everything I signed up for. Yeah, fall of '93. And then in January, Michael Jackson was supposed to start recording his new record, which became history, in Los Angeles, but the Northridge earthquake happened.
Oh.
So Michael literally left LA that morning and called Bruce Swedien, his engineer all the way back to the Wiz, and said, I'm going to be in New York, let's make the record there. So they showed up at the Hit Factory. 2 studios that they wanted to use. One of them, my friend Brian Viberts, was the assistant in, and they asked him, who should the other assistant be? And Brian recommended me. So I just catapulted, you know, everything like changed from that point on.
That's awesome.
And suddenly I was in the room with Bruce Swedien, who was really, you know, shaped my entire life, my entire career. Up until I had heard Michael Jackson's Dangerous, I was like a jazzer guy. I had only hollow body jazz guitars. I had a Gibson ES 175 and an old Guild. all I listened to is like Pat Metheny, Al Di Meola, and of course like Charlie Parker, Miles Davis, all that kind of stuff. I didn't listen to any pop music and nothing with vocals. Earlier in my college days, I heard the record, the song Jam on an NBA game. And I was like, whoa, what is that? So I bought Dangerous. And I looked it up and I'm like, I saw this guy, Bruce Swedien, recording engineer, co-writer, co-producer, drum programming. And I was like, oh, that's the guy. That's why I wanted to work with him, because I started to research his credits and saw that he was an engineer all the way back in the Chicago recording days, recording classical stuff, then did jazz, then worked with Quincy, then worked with Michael, and was writing. And I was like, that sounds like all the things that I can do. So all of a sudden I was thrown in the room with him, and he basically taught me everything. I've worked with a lot of great engineers over the years, but he was the one that like really set the foundation.
Wow.
And I got to work with him really from, I guess, January of 94 until, really up until the first Christina Aguilera record. So a good 5 years we worked on a lot of different projects. During the New York portion of the record, we had 2 full-time studios. Bruce was in one room just constantly mixing whatever stuff we were recording, and the other room was like the writing creation room. So we would work on tracks kind of overnight. Bruce would get them the next morning. He would mix and prepare things all day. We would start on the next thing. So it was just constant round robin. And then after a little bit of time of that, then Bruce started getting involved even more in the tracking. So then we had 2 rooms, and then that wasn't enough. Then we graduated to 3 and 4 rooms. So at one point we had all 4 rooms in the Hit Factory building. And then Teddy Riley came out, so we took 2 more studios in the other room. So we had 6 studios in New York going.
6 studios or 6 rooms that you were mentioning happening at the same time, working every day at the same time.
Yeah.
Wow,
And then when we
amazing.
came to LA, we took over Record One, which is part of Ocean Way, Alan Sides' studio. We took over both of those rooms. So those went like 24/7. Then we had 2 studios over at Larrabee. So we always had like 4 rooms in LA going full speed ahead.
That sounds crazy.
Yeah, it was nutty.
Was it always like that with Michael Jackson? He always, have a lot of things going on.
Yeah, because there were so many songs going, and over time there would be more and more producers. So when we started with Michael, it was just Bruce and Renee who wrote Jam, and then they wrote the song Too Bad, and this time around. So it started with just them kind of cocooning and doing some tracks, and then Brad Buxer came with Michael Jackson. Brad was Michael's musical director, so they were cocooned in a studio. And then all these tracks were getting worked on, and Michael would be like, oh, I think David Foster should produce this one, so suddenly David needs a studio. Bruce and Renee brought in Dallas Austin, and it's all of a sudden Dallas Austin needs a studio. And then, there'd be somebody else. Babyface wrote 3 songs for History that didn't make it. He needed a studio. So constantly new people were being brought in, and they would just camp out in a studio for some amount of time.
How long did it go?
We started January of 94 at the Hit Factory, and I've kind of lost track of it, but spring of 95, we took like a 2-week break, and then we were immediately into doing remixes for Scream, because that was the first single with Janet. Then I went to work with Quincy for 2, maybe 2.5 months, and then right after that, right back to Michael for tour prep, the HBO show that didn't happen, and then a short film, the Ghost short film. So it just kept spiraling into more and more work. I think Billie Jean had 81 mixes, the song.
81?
It was either Billie Jean or Beat It, and there's some, probably Matt Forger, if you're out there, was the assistant and one of the engineers on that record.
Engineer?
He would know. Yeah, Bruce and Quincy and Michael and Rod Temperton
I can't
advising.
imagine.
Yeah, just, I don't know how deep the changes were, if it was like more bass, more vocal. I don't know like what, but yeah, so the mix changed 81 times.
Wow. So we were thinking how hard it is to, make an album nowadays. Now thinking back where the computer or the software didn't exist.
Yeah.
It was, oh my God.
It was so much harder.
Yeah.
And
I hope people appreciate that.
I don't think they do. Or maybe they do, and that's why they don't want to spend a lot of money on records anymore.
Right.
But that's why those records sound the way they do, because of the amount of care it took to make a record. Like, you didn't put something on tape until you were ready. Because if you did, somebody was going to be up all night editing and trying to fix things with archaic gear. Like, now you can just keep throwing things in the computer and let the mixer sort it out.
Right.
It wasn't like that then. You had to get it right.
So you told me a lot of story because we know each other for a long time. But one story that I really like is the story about how Michael Jackson prepared to sing Earth Song.
So we recorded Earth Song in New York. It actually had started prior to the history sessions. Bill Bottrell started the song with Michael. I believe it was for the Dangerous sessions, but somewhere before the history sessions. And Michael decided to kind of revive the song, so he pulled out the analog tape, the 2-inch tapes. And there was quite a bit done to it. There was a groove, there was some synthesizer stuff that the guys from Toto had already done, piano, there may have been a scratch vocal, but it was kind of fleshed out, like, hey, here's the idea for the song. So the guys from Toto came back out, played on it. It was decided that David Foster would produce it, so David produced it, and he had Bill Ross do the string arrangement, huge orchestra, like 100 pieces or something insane. We did a huge mic shootout because Bill Bottrell wouldn't loan us his mic for a long time. It was a U-47. So he was kind of like, I know how you guys record. It could be 2 years till I see this thing again. But so he did send it out for a couple days. We lined up all the Hit Factory's U-47s and compared to try to get as close to Billy's as we could, and I think we did a pretty good job. The lead vocal that you hear now switches between the old Bill's U-47 and a Hit Factory U-47, and nobody's heard the difference, so little Michael Jackson secret there. We mixed the song, we thought we were done. We come out to LA, and like maybe a month or two in, Michael's like, I want to make some changes on Earth Song. So we're like, sure, no problem. We recall it on the SSL, we have perfect notes, everything comes up just the way it's supposed to. We play it back, and it's not the same. Something's changed. So we check all the notes again. We check every little piece of, every track. Everything comes up perfect. All the machines are aligned, and Bruce realizes the EMT 250, which is this reverb unit, looks like an R2D2. It's a square black unit about this tall with red arms and tons of chips inside. Very old reverb unit. Bruce realizes the 250 is the main reverb that's like on everything. It's on the orchestra, it's on part of the vocal, on so many of the tracks that it really defines the character of the song. So we have to fly the EMT 250 from New York out to Record One in LA. So we do that, the mix comes up right, Michael makes some mix changes, we kind of put it away again. So he let everyone know at that point, this has to be the last vocal on the record because I'm going to scream. I'm going to really throw my voice out. And it's the last thing I can do before we go to mastering. So you just have to wait. I don't know what I'm going to say yet. Fast forward to the last weekend of the record. It's still not sung. Thursday night, Michael comes to me and Eddie DeLena, who is kind of his main vocal tracking engineer, and says, I'm really sorry, but I don't think you're going to be able to go to sleep this weekend. We're kind of like, what? So we just had this mad 3-day push. Mastering was a Monday morning at Bernie Grudman's, and this was Thursday night. And we had a bucket list. We had a bunch of stuff to do, Earth Song being one of them. So Saturday night, we kind of made sure everything was in kind of lined up, ready to go. Sunday night, Bruce goes home, kind of his 8-10 p.m. kind of thing. I recall the mix for Earth Song with the Hit Factory EMT 250. Comes back perfectly, everybody's happy. And then Michael goes in the other room where he was set up for vocals to record with Eddie DeLena. They're kind of getting ready, and Michael and I are listening to Earth Song, listening to the mix. He's kind of planning what he's doing. Just kind of hit me like what he was about to do, and he was explaining to me like how he was going to really scream and was kind of nervous, that he was going to throw his voice out. And we started talking about the Beatles' Twist and Shout. And when you listen to that, you hear the voice just tearing apart. And so many people assume that that's like a happy voice and that's like just excitement and raw energy and intentional. What they don't know is he actually had a sore throat that day. Wow. So they tried Twist and Shout a number of times, and it was never right. And the take you hear of Twist and Shout is like the last vocal sung that day of him just shredding his vocal cords. And Michael was like, yeah, I know that story. He's like, thank you. That he's like, that's what I want. Like, that's what I'm going for. He went in the other room and just, killed it. Just screamed and belted and let it all come out. And thankfully, of course, didn't have to sing for a while after that. And then we came back, we mixed, Eddie kind of put it into the track.
How many takes did you do?
I wasn't in the room for the actual singing. Michael was famous for using every empty track. So he would walk in and say, how many tracks do you have? And you'd be like, 8. And he would sing 8 perfect vocals. Come in the next day, how many tracks do you have? 12 perfect vocals. So it was just, that was his kind of idea, is like, oh, you have 4 tracks? I'll give you 4 perfect vocals. And David Foster told him like he had like 40 tracks open. So Michael sang 40 perfect vocals. Like that's how he operated. That's also the song we blew up the speakers on. So we were in the room listening late night. Eddie Delana had left the room, so it was just Michael and I. And it was so loud. I was sitting in the back of the room, probably 12 feet from the Augsburgers that we had made. And I was sitting like this, just like praying that it would be over. And Michael just had it on 10, literally the big knob on the SSL all the way. And all of a sudden on a big hit, blue flames come shooting out of the speaker into the room. I just saw a flash. I was like, whoa, what was that? And he looked at me and like kind of giggled. And then the next big hit comes and another blue flame shoots out. I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. So when he saw that, he started pushing up all the faders so that it would get louder. And then the speakers like literally caught on fire. So it was a forced break, and poor Matt Forger had to change the speakers.
Did he do it for fun?
Yeah. As soon as he saw the blue flash, he was like, oh yeah, this is great.
So another big name that you have, worked with is Christina Aguilera. So how did you meet her?
Oddly enough, when I was working with Quincy, kind of finishing up with Michael, like that whole time period for like a year and a half, maybe, a friend of mine who I went to school with, another guy named Mike Jackson, who's not the Michael Jackson, just another Mike Jackson that I went to school with. He was working at a studio in New York, and they were working with a young girl who had just come off the Musketeers. And he called me, he's like, oh man, I really want you to work with this girl. And I was kind of like, I just got done working with Quincy. Like, what do I do with like a 14-year-old girl? Like, thanks for thinking of me, but I don't even know what to do with that. It's just not even, development isn't in my, my scope of practice right now. It's just not what I want to do. I don't even know how to do it yet. So we kind of stayed in touch, and like 2 full years later, he calls me again. He's like, so that girl I told you about, she's been working with these other producers for 2 years. There's not a lot done. They haven't really made any headway. Would you be willing to work with her? And I was like, okay, now I'm ready. Like, let's take a listen. So they sent me the demo, the one song she had completed, which I think is out in the world now. It's called Just Be Free. That was like the one song they had finished. And they were all, of course, like amazing. I listened to like 20 seconds of each, and I was back on the phone like, yeah, I'll work with her. What day can she come out? So we wrote 5 songs. At that point, she wasn't writing. I wrote them with my partner, Heather. And Christina came out. She sang 5 songs in 5 days. Totally amazing. Just like, and at this point, she's like 80 pounds and 15 years old and just like, it was like amazing. And she had a deal, a few months after that. RCA at the time wasn't really doing well. So to be honest, like RCA was not our first choice. I was hoping for, different labels, and I sent it out to different people. I even sent it to Michael's label, to Michael Jackson's label at the time, NJJ Productions. And they were like, we don't hear it. We don't know if she's got it. And I was like, oops. I think we've established that. And I've met many people since then who've said to me, how come you never sent me Christina's demo? And I get to, be like, well, actually I did, and you didn't return my phone call. So sorry, Universal, MCA, Epic, MJJ Productions. They all had it.
So you basically got her a deal.
Yeah. So her manager's dad knew or had worked with Bob Jameson at RCA in New York for quite some time. So he sent the demo over to Bob, and Bob, of course, like heard it and was like, wow, this is amazing.
ค่ะและที่ได้เห็นกันไปนะคะเป็นแค่ครึ่งตอนเท่านั้นเองนะคะกับการพูดคุยกับ Rob Hoffman นะคะเกี่ยวกับการทำงานของเขาที่ได้มีประสบการณ์กับ ศิลปินมากมายนะคะที่ได้ฟังไปแล้วเกี่ยวกับไมเคิลแจ็กสันแล้วก็นิดนึงเกี่ยวกับคริสติน่า อากิลาร่านะคะก็ยังมีศิลปิน international ท่านอื่นๆอีกนะคะไม่ว่าจะเป็นจากประเทศโปแลนด์นะคะหรือว่าเมืองจีนนะคะแล้วก็ประเทศไทยเองก็เริ่มมีแล้วเหมือนกันนะคะถ้ายังไงขอบคุณมากนะคะที่มาติดตาม Lady AM Zone ที่ 2 ในวันนี้นะคะถ้ายังไงก็ stay tuned นะคะตอนต่อไปเรามาติดตามชมกันต่อค่ะเรื่อง Rob Hoffman ค่ะสวัสดีค่ะขอบคุณค่ะ